Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome to the Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm Santita Jackson. It's a joy to be with you after the Super Bowl. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Who did you have? Did you have a good time? Did you cry or did you rejoice? Well, tell you what, a lot of things have got people excited these days, none more so than um, the election. The election has got everybody excited. And so I want to know what your thoughts are because now we're trying to figure out who's going to get on the ballot. Will Trump be on the ballot? Of course, last week the Supreme Court heard his case. The Supreme Court of the state of Colorado banned him from the ballot. Of course, he sued and the case is being heard by the Supreme Court. All nine justices were skeptical of the decision made by the Supreme Court of Colorado. And many people are wondering what this means. Will courts decide our elections or will we? We cannot forget about Bush v. Gore. What happened in Bush v. Gore? Well, the courts decided our presidency. The tragedy of that is that the courts decided our presidency, but more than that, the will of the people was subverted. Not only did Vice President Gore win the national election, he actually won in Florida. And the Supreme Court stopped the recount. And so now we got George W. Bush as president and a million dead Iraqis. I'm going right there because that's what happened. Bad, bad, bad decisions. And so the question is, what is going on? So I want you to please join us on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, and here on AM 950 Radio, stream live and let people know about us. Let's discuss Colorado's attempt, or a state more broadly, a state's attempt to ban former President Donald Trump from the Colorado ballot. My question for you is, should the courts decide or should you decide who's on the ballot? It's already hard enough if you're not in the Democratic or Republican Party machine to get on the ballot, Aaron Connolly and Attorney Anastasi Sanat, because if you are not in either of those parties, as a presidential candidate, you catch the devil trying to get on the ballot. So that's part of this rabbit hole too. But this case that is now before the Supreme Court brings a lot of constitutional, social, political, and cultural issues forward. Not just constitutional, but social, political, and cultural. Indeed, the conservative Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, John Roberts, said that if the Colorado decision is upheld, other states will proceed with disqualifying proceedings for their own partisan purposes, Democratic or Republican candidates. He said it will be a mess, and I quote, and it will come down to just a handful of states that are going to decide the presidential election. That's a pretty daunting consequence. You tell me, what do you think? Let's start with you, Attorney Aaron Connolly. What do you make of this? I mean, it just gets crazier and crazier, but I just think it's the times that we're living in.
Yeah, and I think the important thing that this case highlights, and let's look at it in the context of where we are in the political process, right? This is the reality we're inside in the United States. Many states have already started either early voting for primary candidates or campaigning for these primary elections. People are certified, ballots are being printed. And once those primaries, caucuses, and votes take place, it's hard to deny the voters that choice as well, right? There's many local, state, national, federal implications for removing someone from a ballot at this stage in the process. And I think what we've said on your show from the beginning of these cases is, if this was going to be an issue, it should have been brought earlier, right? Where it could have been adjudicated in a manner in which where it wouldn't impact an impending election where ballots are very literally printed in many cases here, right? So it feels more political than substantially just a constitutional argument as to whether or not Donald Trump should be removed from the ballot from a constitutional perspective, right? So the questions that we heard from the Supreme Court, the skepticism about that, I believe, is a large part in the timing of this, as we're in the middle of this very intense political process on both sides of the aisle, right? And more than ever, people are want to have a say, and we understand the rhetoric and the potential dangers that were referenced as well, right? And I think it's important that we talk about that impact, and also balance that with a modicum of accountability for very real issues with regard to violating constitutional norms and best practices for the commander in chief of the armed forces of the United States of America, someone who took an oath to defend and protect the principles of our Constitution, right? So these are all important things we need to discuss, but we need to discuss them in a factual way. We need to make sure we're above board in these debates and are using the best possible legal arguments instead of political ones, right? I think that's important from a fairness and process perspective, that no matter what side you're coming at this from, we have to look at the facts of the case.
Well, I agree. But I would add that, if you don't mind me jumping in, I'm sorry.
No, jump on in.
Hi, Santita. Hello, everyone.
And this is Attorney Anastasia Sanat. You were just hearing the voice of Attorney Erin Connolly, noted political organizer and consultant. Yes. And Attorney Anastasia Sanat, Haitian American Lawyers Association of Illinois.
Thank you so much. I'm, being a civil rights attorney in my profession has allowed me to work with administrations in the past. I've worked with the Bush administration, the Obama administration. Then I had the Trump administration, and I'm currently into the Biden administration. So I've been able to see how each administration has been able to impact the actual work of their employees. But one of the things that I think is very interesting is that this is the first time since the Civil War in which 35 different states. Okay, it's not just one state. I mean, we're talking about Colorado, but there's 35 different states that are challenging whether or not former President Donald Trump can be on a ballot. And that is why the Supreme Court now has that case. Out of those 35 states, the facts are the challenge to him being on the ballot is whether or not his participation in the 2020 election, quote unquote, insurrection would bar him from being on the ballot. That is the issue. Now, when I didn't hear all of the oral argument, but there were some key points from the oral argument that was made before the United States Supreme Court. And Chief Justice Roberts brought up a good point, but I think it's kind of too broad of a point. But the point that he was trying to make is basically there's a slippery slope when we allow one ban to occur, because are they then going to use this ban to allow other candidates not to be on a ballot if we agree to this? But I think that highlights what we're talking about in the sense that it's really a very narrow issue. How many people are actually going to run for office that have tried to overthrow the government? How many people have engaged or participated in any way, shape, or form in order to try the United States government? When have we had so many people go on January 6th in order to try to overthrow the United States government? And unfortunately, people lost their lives. I think that the issue that the Supreme Court is dealing with is a very narrow issue. And although a lot of the conservatives have brought up different avenues or questions that one needs to consider, I think the facts lead to you just looking at what the facts are. Did he participate to overthrow the election decision? If he did, does that constitute an insurrection in the sense that the 14th Amendment would therefore bar him? And I believe that if we just look at the facts and we look at what's really going on, then I think that's all we really do need to look at. And so in that sense, I agree. The formal challenges to Donald Trump are pretty broad in some states. Colorado, obviously, the Supreme Court has already made their decision, but the challenges in all the other states are currently under appeal. I think that 35 out of 50 states have made the decision that they don't want him on the ballot, including here in the state of Illinois. I mean, we've also got, Wisconsin. Those are states that he didn't even carry in the election. So out of the 35, 22 of them were actually carried by Biden, and they weren't even carried by former President Trump. Only 13 of those were carried by former President Trump. But what does that say to the American public? Out of the 13 that he carried, including where Maine was split and he got one single electoral vote there, what are we saying to the American public? Even if we voted for you in the past, by your actions, by your deeds, we're going to try to uphold the Constitution and ban you from being a part of election. That's a slap in the face of Mr. Trump, as far as I'm concerned. Like, I'm not in that arena. I'm not trying to be in that arena. But I think that if I were running for office and I heard that 35 out of the 50 states don't want me, that hurts. And I'm sure it hurts his ego because, we've seen how he responds to rejection, right?
But Anastasia, all these guys, you're not going to get into this space. And I think that we have to be very, very careful. Everyone focuses on his personality and his ego. You think Biden does not have an ego?
Of course.
All these people have big egos.
Sure.
All of these people have outsized personalities and ambitions. The question is, for me, ultimately, how do the American people feel? How does this land on the American people? I think that is the bigger issue. I think that's why the Chief Justice's comments really bear a lot of scrutiny, because I think that he's looking at the social context in which all decisions are made. I mean, the Brown v. Board of Education decision was made in the post-World War II era, when Black people came back from a war that they were not keen on fighting because of what we were enduring with lynchings and just the blatant racism in America, in this post-Reconstruction America. And you had to have a Brown v. Board of Education and decision, and behind that you got the Emmett Till killing. And then you had the Montgomery bus boycott. I mean, all these things, happen in a particular point in the zeitgeist, right?
Sure, like Plexi versus Ferguson. That
Absolutely
hasn't even been overturned yet. But no one
Absolutely.
applies that anymore, but it's precedential. But same with Roe v. Wade. Did
Yeah.
we ever think that case was going to get first granted or then overturned within a 50-year period? No.
We have
So
to
we don't know what
we
these
have to
conservative justices are
redo
going to do.
law school portions, right? Like, this is the unraveling of that portion of our stare decisis is unimaginable, right? Like, as you said, it's unthinkable, and what those implications could be if we have an additional conservative trend on the court. I would love to mention for a minute, Santita, and I know you've brought it up before, there should be some recusals from hearing this case in the Supreme Court. And
Thomas, right? Would you explain that to me?
Right? If we had a non-political Supreme Court, we would see some recusals at this point, and we don't. So that brings up a whole nother issue for me.
Well, I mean, explain. Flesh that out.
Well, first of all, I think the obvious one, which we've talked about many times on your show, Santita, is the issue of Justice Thomas and his wife and the involvement, particularly in January 6th, and the overturning of the election results, right, leading up to that. I think that alone should trigger some sort of recusal by Justice Thomas. I think, that is on record. She's been interviewed. This is again, if we're looking at facts, I think that has to be part of the conversation here. And I know it has been a little bit, but we do not see him recusing himself, as would be a best practice.
He should step down altogether, Ms. Connolly. I think that he shouldn't even be on the Supreme Court at this point. I think there's too many conflict of interest. He's definitely done a poor job of representing not only himself, but the American public. And particularly for me as a Black woman, I'm just ashamed of him altogether. So I would think he needs to step down altogether. But I do agree. based on the facts, your wife was involved. How can you truly make a decision on something so pivotal to where we are, as Santita Jackson said, in the zeitgeist of our lives? You know what I'm saying? It's just incredible to me. I mean, I don't know if Attorney Jones has anything to say about it, but I think this is pivotal.
I think so. Attorney Jones?
Well, no, I'm right on point with the discussion. I certainly have said and have been a proponent of the position that where we are right now in American society is that we are re-examining the integrity of our entire system, presidential, the executive branch, the legislative branch, as well as the judicial branch. And the judicial branch right now in the American psyche is extremely damaged, and there's a questions with regards to their integrity. And as Attorney Sanat was saying, Justice Thomas is now, along with Gorsuch, the poster child of the question of the integrity of the Supreme Court. And so, what we're going through now it's really a buildup of all that has been occurring from the leak and the Dobbs decision. Through the handling of so many other cases that have questioned the integrity of the court, not to talk about the financial side and the financial entanglements that the court now is going through. And so now we're at a position where the court has got to make a decision with regards to former President Trump. You get the entanglement, as we talked about one of the justices' wives in the middle of all of this. It's a mess. And the question is, can the court... This is an opportunity for the court to find its integrity. This is an opportunity for the court to prove to the American people that it can operate and not have to worry about the appearance of an impropriety, because right now it looks bad. It looks very bad. And Chief Justice Roberts knows that. And so, the question is, will they take the steps necessary to have the American people feel as though they can trust the decisions of our Supreme Court right now?
But I think that's a question that Americans have, and I want to make sure you're not on an earpiece because I want to make sure you don't go in and out, Attorney Jones, and of course this is Attorney Daryl Jones, Chairman of the Transformative Justice Coalition. I'm concerned because Americans feel. I think the world over. I just think it's the spirit of the times. Don't trust the major institutions. They just don't trust them, and so. I think that the Chief Justice recognizes that by getting in this, they can make a bad situation worse. The thing is, for the people not to have decided the 2000 election, I was riveted by that. Attorney Erin Connolly, Attorney Anastasia Sinat, Attorney Daryl Jones, and I felt horrible. I was outraged when the court intervened and stopped the recount, because it was so. You have the man who's running for president, whose brother is the governor of the pivotal state, the sitting governor. We've just seen so much malfeasance. The quiet part is being said out loud, Attorney Jones. This is not new. It's just it's now out here.
I agree. Gore versus Bush was a pivotal case. I actually began my law school career when that case was occurring. So a lot of students, law students, 1Ls, we call them, the first year law students, were definitely interested in what was going on and how that was going to pan out. And many of us were very concerned with, unfortunately, the political position that the then Supreme Court was going to be taking, because it really was a political question according to the teachings we had thus far, right?
Mm-hmm.
We hadn't finished our first year of law school, but at the time we were thinking this is a political question. Should they really be getting involved? Should they really be stopping the recount? But it happened, right? And it hasn't happened since, but here we have another issue. Is it really a political issue? And I don't think that it is. I don't think it's a political issue in the sense that you literally have a constitutional amendment that specifically addresses someone who tries to overthrow the government. What do we do? This is a consequence. You can't run for office. They don't address, in the situation of becoming a president, whether or not a criminal record will keep you or prevent you from becoming president. You only need 3 things. You need to be born here, you need to be 35 or over, and you need to have been a resident in the United States for 14 years. Those are the only 3 qualifications. Being a convicted felon, which out of 91 indictments that former President Donald Trump has, I don't know that he's going to go scot-free on that. But can he be
But
president?
I don't know how the feds, when they want to, they can indict a flea. Because all indictments, quite frankly, are political. I never separate the political from anything. Remember, Dr. King was the most hated man in America in real time. That was a political decision. And you had the instruments of media, the New York Times, the LA Times, the Chicago Sun-Times, all of these major newspapers who wrote disparaging papers on him. Throughout his whole public career, he lived under the scrutiny of the IRS. He was under audit every year of his public life. Every year. Mm-hmm. The head of the FBI called him in, presented tapes of him of his personal life and manuscripts. Everything is political.
But as you mentioned, in the time of Martin Luther King, obviously I wasn't here at the time.
Okay, I need you to get closer to the mic on the side.
Oh, I'm sorry. At the time of Martin Luther King, I wasn't here. I wasn't born yet. But certainly the people that were in our leadership definitely had a bias that was clear and evident.
But wait a minute. Because I grew up beyond that, because my family, every one of us has an FBI file because of our father and mother's activities.
Right.
And the point is, that has never stopped. When you looked at Michael Moore's movie, it was about Iraq. Mm-hmm. And they found that in one of their peace meetings, one of these peace groups that he was a part of, it turns out that the most violent person in the group was a police plant. Mm-hmm. And it is the FBI who are surveilling Black Lives Matter today. This stuff hasn't stopped.
But I think maybe I'm altruistic about it, but I think that we are moving away from the targets. That I obviously you disagree, but I think we are moving away from targeted use of federal resources in order to do this to people. I don't think
that we are. I think that we should be, but we haven't done that yet. Remember our inclinations to be a right-wing country, Anastasi.
Okay.
Slavery, women, second-class citizens, genocide of indigenous people, colonialism. We're anchored in that. Mm-hmm. And I think we've got to be, that's something I heard Reverend Jackson say often. And it's true. Doesn't mean that we can't get better. Doesn't mean that we have not sought to grow, but it's who we are.
Sure. We're definitely built on us. I don't know why Nancy or Nikki Haley said that we were not.
Because she's white proximate.
Okay.
and white proximate people try to get white. Amen. And you can jump in that too, Aaron, because the closer you get to white, the more white you want to be. And she will never be that. Nikki Haley went into South Carolina as an Indian girl. She knows what she went through. And you cannot say that her appointment of Tim Scott was disconnected from that. She gets along with Black people very, very well. But we also know within the Indian community, they also have their issues. Colorism, Anastasi, Daryl, caste system, Aaron. Come on, y'all.
Sure, absolutely.
They got mad issues.
I mean, they have cases from immigration indicating that someone who was from India.
Okay, I need you to come closer to the mic.
Huh?
Oh, just come in closer to the mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. They have an immigration case in which someone from India, way back in the day before citizenship was allowed for everybody, was trying to argue that he was white and therefore he should be allowed to enter as a United States citizen. So these cases do exist. It's not new to me. It's not new to many lawyers that are, especially in the immigration space, who have heard of these cases. But I do think that it's interesting that we're in a time where this question literally has to even be brought to the United States Supreme Court. Why was he even in that situation?
Well, Aaron, why do you take a stab at it? I mean, because I think republics have a shift after a certain amount of time. And I think we're just in that moment when we are experiencing that shift. America perhaps is moving out of adolescence into early adulthood. And, growing is painful. Aaron?
Yeah, and what I think we see in the Supreme Court this week, I think what we see in this case where we look at the facts and we look at the politics and we come to different answers. And we look at the fragility of where we've allowed a Supreme Court to be in such a crucial time where we need folks that are above the political fray and can hold us to a standard of our aspirations as opposed to our history. Because as Santita said, this is nothing new for us, right? We hope that we can do better, but when reality presents a challenge for us in our republic so far, we tend to intervene for the powers that be, and we're seeing more tension than ever, I think, with kind of this old guard versus new vision and accountability. There's a real frustration on the right and the left of what do we really stand for? What are we paying for? There are different rules for people based on power and money, and this doesn't seem fair on any side of it. And the politics of it should not be playing as big of a role as they are. But I think we've allowed our systems to become politicized in a way where now our republic is at stake, and quite literally. And thinking about additional appointments to a Supreme Court, additional lifetime appointments for federal judges, control of state Supreme Courts, and how those rules are enforced, gerrymandering decisions and how the courts play in those choices. A lot's at stake in this next election. And this week, I think we saw the cracks that maybe have always been there. And I was telling Santita that this weekend I was reading back to some of our originalist texts, trying to find some loopholes with this originalist Supreme Court, and was led to George Washington's farewell address. And I was struck with the amount of reality checking that he does about how our country is really aligned. And it's not a values-based system. It's not this feel-good alignment. It's interest. It's economic and power interests. And those levers were sensitive at best. And we saw that with the Civil War. We continue to I think, underestimate the fragile nature of our democracy and our systems. And when we allow I think the biggest thing that stuck out to me, and I would love everyone's opinion on this, was we were so worried about insulating our republic from outside forces and attacks that we failed to put enough safeguards in place to prevent internal struggles from destroying us from the inside. And I think we're at a peak point of that tension. I think, we've been building to that for quite some time. But when we look at our defense systems that were built in when our country was formed, and we can look to the Federalist Papers and some of these original arguments that our Supreme Court loves to look at, we see a fundamental flaw that needs to be corrected at the building of this, right? I think that's a problem. We haven't looked at ourselves and where we're coming from, and prepared for this enough. And I think that's part of the tension right now.
I agree with Aaron in the sense that we are definitely in a situation in which we should be considering those things. But I guess I go back to the same argument that I've been making, which is it really political, or is it just a legal argument that we're considering? Because why did they put it in during the Civil War? We probably should have done more to insulate ourselves from our own bad actors. But were we thinking that we were bad actors at the time of the Constitution and its creation? I don't think we were. But in 1865, after the Civil War, we had almost 100 years to have considered that. Why didn't we consider it at that time? What are we doing now as Americans to make sure that the Constitution is more shored up? In order to ratify the Constitution, look at how much has to go into it. I mean, 2/3 of the House, 3/4 of the states, all of that would have to go in just to shore up our Constitution at this point. I do think it's a little bit archaic because it says all men are created equal, in which, women are not even considered. So Aaron Connolly and myself are not even considered in the initial Constitution. But what I would like to see is, even though we can shore it up, let's make it an issue on politics. Let's bring it to the forefront. Let's have that a legal issue. The Constitution is obviously getting weaker and weaker with every judicial decision that the Supreme Court issues, just like the Roe v. Wade. It just gets decisions. So many different critical things that we are doing with this conservative bench is going to impact us for a long time unless we can shore up the Constitution. But what are we doing when we come to electing officials that are willing to shore it up, willing to insulate us from our own bad actions? I don't think we're doing enough, personally. I don't know what Attorney Jones thinks, but I don't think we're doing enough.
Well, it's really interesting because, in listening to the conversation and we're talking about, and I think that Aaron's question with regards to, were we prepared for things that happen from within as opposed to outside of the country? I think that a lot of what we are looking at now, when we talk about the insurrection, when we talk about the Civil War as a major insurrection, the term that we will use now is domestic terrorism, right? And the Civil War was an act of domestic terrorism. The acts I would certainly submit of January 6th are acts of domestic terrorism. And it becomes a question of at what point, and it's primarily because, these were non-Black actors, right, that they're not terming it domestic terrorism. But at what point, because if you start looking at it as acts of domestic terrorism, and that former President Trump was heading up, was the Jefferson Davis, right, of the Civil War, of this act of domestic terrorism that just occurred as they tried to overturn what happened on January 6th, I think the country then starts taking a different view of it, a different understanding of what actually happened. But I don't think that is the information and the image that the media is portraying for America to absorb. So America is trying to absorb whatever image mass media is throwing out there. And so I think that really, is one of the problems with this entire piece. And let it not be lost that when we're talking about this Supreme Court, we're not talking about a Supreme Court that is representative of the mass, the population, the general population of the United States, right? Because we know that 6 of the 9 of them were appointed by people, appointed by presidents that did not win the popular vote. So it's a minority vote or electoral college vote that has gotten the appointment of these 6 members of the Supreme Court that are now making these decisions. So, I think it's all just one big ball of wax that's dealing with how we treat the domestic terrorism, calling it what it is. They don't, I don't think I've heard the term domestic terrorism defined for the January 6th or defined as what former President Trump tried to do. And the closest they've come now is calling it an insurrection. But I think if you start calling it what it is, so that the American people can really have an appreciation for what happened. We know that many of the Republicans that were there were trying to say what? They weren't even. I don't even think they were saying that people were fighting or anyone got hurt. They were just sort of touring or something like that, the Capitol that day, right? As opposed to calling it what it is. So I think it's important that we call it what it is, that it was an act of domestic terrorism, that the Supreme Court now should be dealing with that act of domestic terrorism and making its determinations. And that's a large part of the problem. I agree that the voters certainly, are in a position where we can put into position candidates and elected officials that will best reflect our values. And that's sort of where we are right now. As the question is, are we going to be able to put into place candidates that best reflect our values? But it comes back to the Supreme Court, because now we have all them making all these decisions with regards to gerrymandering and how to water down people's votes so that, the majority isn't the majority. So, there's just so much that's going on in the American mindset right now, so much that's being thrown at the American public, at the American voter, that at some point in time, I'm sure people want to throw their hands up and say, enough, I get it.
You know what? I think we have to be careful, though, Daryl, because one man's insurrectionist is another man's freedom fighter. Remember, Americans are seditious by nature, okay? We were born of revolution. So I don't know if I'm willing to call this domestic terrorism only because there were so many intelligence people. I mean, when you dig down deep into January 6th, first of all, you and I, all of us know that when you go on Capitol Hill, when you are above ground, you can't figure that place out because it's Byzantine, and these people knew the layout of the Capitol, which made me go, that's interesting. Very few people, relatively speaking, in the United States know the layout of the Capitol. You have to have been there. And then you find that a lot of people who were involved were part of intelligence. I think that we have to be careful because Dr. King, for all intents and purposes, was a domestic terrorist, according to some, right? I certainly am not going to make him an insurrectionist, but some people called him that. I think we have to be careful because we have to leave room for people to question elections.
Mm-hmm.
We have to leave room for people to ask questions, of course, in a peaceful, nonviolent way. And that was January 6th, looked crazy. It was crazy. But you're also dealing with a frustrated and angry American public. I mean, you had the economy collapse and we've never recovered from that. No one's talking about that. And so you got a lot of angry people. You have the Tea Party that came out of that, but then they were co-opted by the Republicans. Then you had Occupy Wall Street. They were co-opted by the Democrats. There is a lot going on underneath the American skin, underneath the American surface. And unless we deal with that, we're missing a whole lot here. We're missing a whole lot because you have a lot of people who were just average American citizens who were marching that day, who didn't make it up to the Hill. I wouldn't call them domestic terrorists. I mean, and at some point, what happened on January 6th took a turn. But, on that day, we had Ray McGovern on my show. One of the CIA officers who used to brief the President of the United States. He was among the first people that the President of the United States would see. And he did this for 27 years. CIA officer who briefed the President on intelligence matters. And he was on my show and he said, typically on the Hill, you got about 2,400 security officers. Only a fourth of them were there that day. There was a whole lot that happened that day that was just strange, that no one has ever really explained, and the corporate media have not asked the questions, Daryl and Anastasi and Aaron. And that for me is problematic.
Mm-hmm.
There's just too much that happened. And I guess because I have seen so much, I know this system is real controlled. And you just don't roll up on the Capitol, Daryl. You know that.
But the question is, Santita, did they organize themselves prior to even going to the Capitol?
There was a lot that happened. You have the Maryland governor who has the National Guard at the bridge, and they're being told to stand down. And you don't know what kind of fight was happening within the intelligence agencies. It's very clear that Trump has his adherents in the agencies, and other people have theirs. There's a lot going on here at this particular moment. And I think we need to acknowledge that. And I think we need to grow up in our politics and understand everything is political, everything is politicized. And we need to see, okay, we need to ask some questions that I think we're very uncomfortable asking.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what really happened here?
And let's not forget, Santita, that, and people tend to forget this part, that, when all of this was going on, there were text messages that were going on amongst Secret Service people. And when the Congress went to subpoena those text messages, they said, they've all been erased. Okay. Now, we both know. Okay. We all know text messages are forever. You may erase it off your device. They're there. They can be recovered. To this day, we hear no conversation with regards to the acts taken to recover those messages. What was being said? What's being kept from Congress? What's being kept from the American people? There's a lot that's there.
You got the sitting president of the United States who's telling his Secret Service agents, I want to go here, and they tell him absolutely not. What? And I'm someone who's lived with those people for 2 years. Number one, you got to sign papers to have them protect you. and they have rules, and you must observe them.
So the Secret Service coming underneath the head of the Department of Homeland Security. I thought it was interesting that the sitting president at the time was able to direct them up until the last minute, right, of his presidency.
Which was odd to me, honestly. It left me begging. It left me asking a lot of questions because I have been in the room. I've lived in the bubble.
Okay.
And when you live in the bubble, you go, oh, okay. I mean, I remember someone coming to our house after Dad ran the first time. And because there are buttons all over the place, because wherever the protectee goes, there had at that time, this is 40 years ago, you had to have a button in case he fell out, tripped, whatever, because they had to come in and protect him no matter what, even from you. Okay. And he said, you just might as well blow. He said, he looked at my mother. He said, you might as well blow up this house because they have now got your place officially wired for sound. Don't you remember when Michelle Obama in the White House, when the kids asked her, if you could do anything, what would you want to do? She said, I'd walk right on out of this place. I'd walk right out that door and I'd keep right on. I keep right on walking because it is a bubble. And
sure.
So there was and to me, there's just a lot going on. And there was a lot going on with January 6th because January 6th was allowed.
But that's what I want to go back to what you were talking about, the bubble.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back to literally what we're talking about when it comes to the 14th Amendment. In Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, it prohibits anyone who has previously taken an oath of office, which includes senators, representatives, and other public officials like the president and vice president, from holding public office if they have engaged in an insurrection or rebellion against the United States government. That is why we're so concerned with the word insurrection. And I agree with Attorney Jones.
Wait a minute.
We're looking at insurrection and the definition of insurrection, and we're looking
at mind
the
you, I'm concerned about that.
It's pretty much the same.
But all we have to do is look at what Lincoln did after the war. Because what he ended up doing was basically freeing the sedition of the insurrection.
But did he engage in an insurrection? And did that clause?
No. What I'm saying is these people tried to tear the country up.
I'm just saying the clause came in after he did what he did. Maybe
I'm just saying.
Connolly was saying maybe that was the one little protection they thought from the bad actors within our country. Maybe that was what they wanted to do. So,
but he did it to save the country. But he did it to save the country because he said that if we don't become brethren and sisters again, the country will never survive.
Well, Donald Trump can easily take your argument and say, I was doing it in order to save the country from a bad election.
But according to many of his adherents, that's how they feel.
But it wasn't the truth.
Those are not the facts. I think what we need to begin to do is talk to them and find out what their thinking is. We do a lot of talking about people and not enough talking with people and listening to people.
Do you think he should be on the ballot and then we should listen to the voters at this point? Or should we just use the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment in order to preclude him from the ballot? That's what I want to know. Which side are you on? I'm
on the side of letting the people decide. One of the things, I believe in the Constitution and all of that. I do. That having been said, what I look at the Bush v. Gore decision. Where was the 14th Amendment then? Because those Republican kids terrorized the people who were counting the votes. You remember that? You remember how they flew them in from Washington and they rushed the doors when these folks were trying to count the votes? You remember that?
No, but what I do know is that it's totally different what they were doing, what they did to the Capitol.
Anastasia, go back and look at the footage.
Okay. I will, but I'm just saying.
Because I know Reverend was trying to lead a march on Tallahassee, and what they did to stop it was pull out the fact that he had had a child out of wedlock. End of story. So we don't need to talk about this anymore. What we need to do is focus on Reverend Jackson's personal life and not on the fact that the election is being stolen. And that was a political decision. And then you hand it off to the Supreme Court. They make a decision to stop counting the votes. And when they ended up counting all the votes, Anastasia and Aaron and Daryl, guess what? It turns out, lo and behold, Al Gore not only won the popular vote in the country. He won the popular vote in Florida.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but where's Gore now?
No. I mean, but I'm saying
he hasn't
saying
come back in over 20 years. Where is he?
Yeah, no. But no. Gore was told, I'm sure, to stand down. Something happened there. That these things are not as simple as what we see on TV. This ain't tiddlywinks. This is real power. This ain't Schoolhouse Rocks. That's not how power works.
But the Reading Rainbow helps a lot of United States citizens.
What you say? I need you in the mic, babe.
I said the Reading Rainbow will help a lot of the United States citizens. Sometimes they just need to read.
Would, but unfortunately, from what I've seen, it don't quite work that way. Mm-hmm. It is a little bit more complex. So at the end of the day, Americans are a different kind of people. We need to feel that we have agency. More and more Americans don't feel that they have agency. And to me, that is, Anastasia, I think that is dangerous when you have white people who feel disenfranchised. Aaron, Daryl, they feel disenfranchised now. Black folks, brown folks, indigenous people, we're all accustomed to getting kicked in the shins. You now have white people whose dreams have been dashed. 25, 30-year-olds who living at home with mom and dad if they can. Ain't got no money, and diminished prospects. And people are getting angrier by the day. Which is why I think Chief Justice Roberts said consequences could be daunting. If you don't let this joker on the ballot, and I don't think he was being intimidated into that. I think he saw where the court, I don't think we need to get in this because people don't even like us. They don't even trust us. And you got Clarence Thomas sitting there as big as you please, with his wife being at the heart of January 6th, and he's just sitting there making the decision, and and the Chief Justice didn't push him off the case. How does that work, Anastasia and Aaron and Daryl? I'm no lawyer. You explain that to me.
I think Justice Brett Kavanaugh mentioned disenfranchising voters in a significant degree, but I think it's also funny that the United States Congress hasn't even done anything in order to assure that the Voters' Rights Act has been shored up and will never.
They don't care.
I know they don't care, but that's what I'm saying. When Attorney Jones is bringing up values and how we are electing people that obviously don't always reflect our values, and you mentioning the gerrymandering and how they're getting involved in that, I think it's important for us to realize some of these conservative views. I understand that our Supreme Court justices, many of them are conservatives. I understand some of these views that they're articulating, but at the end of the day, why would you say that now? Why are you using the arguments of the common folk in order to basically support Donald Trump's ability to be on the ballot? I just don't think those arguments are strong arguments, and I don't think they should have been raised in the oral arguments. But I feel like they're leaning towards supporting him anyhow. I mean, I think they're leaning towards your perspective in that he should be allowed on the ballot.
You're gonna make it my perspective? Okay.
Yeah, I went with it. Yeah, I went there because it's definitely not my perspective. Okay.
No, I respect that. I really do. I just, I think
in a literal reading of the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, I really believe that he engaged in an insurrection, and I believe that the states have a right in order to ban him from the ballot.
But I think what you've got to do first is you have to definitively and definitely make him an insurrectionist, and you have to do it in the courts, and then you can say that. Otherwise, we're just talking in the wind, I think. I've got just under 3 minutes to give everybody closing comments. I know Attorney Anastasia Santita is going to have to leave us, Soror. I don't know how long Aaron can stay, or Attorney Daryl Jones, but we're going to stay tuned for the second hour. But Attorney Santita, I've got a minute for you before you go.
Well, thank you, Soror. I'm very proud to be a member of a variety of different organizations, including the organization that we're a part of, where social action and justice is something that we seek to encourage people within the community in order to not only educate themselves, become politically aware, but also to get involved. I think one of the things that is important, going back to it wasn't to be totally sarcastic, but it was kind of funny, the Reading Rainbow. I think if the American public and just Congress in general just took the time to read, right? And if they needed to break apart this Section 3 that was formed after Abraham Lincoln's Civil War, then we would know how engage is such a broad word that even a phone call or a text, as Attorney Jones had brought up, would be simple enough in order for that person to be accused of engaging. But you're correct. Maybe they do need to define in the courts what actually constitutes an insurrection. I
Yeah.
personally believe charging the Capitol constitutes an
Yeah,
insurrection.
but I'm just saying, just do it.
Just
You
do
understand
it,
what I'm
right.
saying?
None
That
of them
way we're not.
are willing to do it at this point. They're still doing that. I mean,
Yeah,
look at who lost her
you
position.
can't do it that way.
Cheney lost her position.
Yeah, but I'm just saying, to me, define it, say it,
Mm-hmm.
and then we have a basis upon which we can talk. Otherwise, you're just accusing me. That means nothing in the court of law, and I'm just a layperson.
Right. Well, I thank you again for having given me this opportunity to talk to your listeners as well as to you and the other two panelists. I really do believe in my position. Just look at the law. What does it say, and can we apply? And I think
I'm feeling you. I just want them to go on and define an insurrectionist and legally define him as that, and then we can move on. Otherwise, we're just talking. I don't like speculation. But I love you, and we're going to push on out of here. AM 950 Radio, the Santita Jackson Show. We're still talking about Trump and whether he'll be on the ballot or not. Who should decide, the courts or you? Should he be on the ballot? Should he not? More than 30 states are asking the question. Back in just a minute.